How about we get back to a bit of a normal topic here in the tabletop battlefield with some wild speculation about the upcoming Starcraft miniatures game from Archon Studio. And also I do have some actual facts about it too, but that's not nearly as exciting. And to make things even more exciting tonight, I accidentally put too much ghost pepper seasoning in my dinner, so I'm going to kind of struggle a bit through this video. But what we've got here is a series of pictures that came out from a recent AMA that Archon Studio does every now and then. So let me bring up the first image right here and we can talk about some of the facts that we know about this game. This picture right here is from a playtest they did with the Blizzard team, and it's a mixture of actual production miniatures as well as some prototype stuff. But that brings me to the first fact that we know, is that some of these miniatures are already production ready and they've started making the sprues for those figures. Second, we know that pre-orders, at least according to Archon Studio, are still expected later this year, with initial release probably late Q1, early Q2 in 2026. We're going to see in a moment here, there are some clear plastic parts of these miniatures. I'll talk more about my opinion on that when we get to them. But that is one thing they've been talking about and kind of hyping up a bit for these miniatures, that some of them are going to have some really cool clear and translucent pieces. Some other things that I'm really excited about is there's no true line of sight. Holy crap, that is amazing. So they've got a whole system, they're gonna probably go more detail into it later about height and how these walls work and how you figure out if there's line of sight or not. But there's no getting down, looking behind a miniature and trying to figure out if a little sword is sticking over a wall or not, and none of that stupid bull crap. Seriously, if you're new to this channel, I hate true line of sight. It's the worst thing tabletop gaming ever created. It really is. Now, originally, when we saw some of the initial discussion about this game and some of the things that Archon was saying, they were talking about having custom dice to make the whole battle system go a little bit smoother, but apparently it's going to take too long to actually create custom dice to meet the timeline they want to do it. So they're falling back to standard D6s, as you see in this image. As much as I'm not a big fan of custom dice, it would actually work pretty well with Starcraft, because Starcraft does have a bit of a paper, rock, scissors aspect of their combat. So in addition to your base stats in the game, units have tags. For example, they may be armored, they may be light. There's a whole bunch of things like that. They're attributes to describe the unit. And weapons will interact with units in different ways based on their attributes. So for example, an armor-piercing weapon may do more damage to an armored unit, whereas certain weapons may do more damage to a light unit. And that is something that could be really represented easily with custom dice in a game. You take something kind of like the Star Wars Legion dice, where you have the surge symbol. So for example, you have maybe a base of like 2 or 3 hits on the die you roll, and that's your normal attack. But if you have an advantage over a light unit or an advantage over an armored unit, and that's the type of unit you're attacking, then maybe that surge icon would come into play to give you a slightly increased chance of hitting and doing additional damage. Now that they're not going to have custom dice and falling back to normal D6s, so there could be a lot of other ways they could approach it. And there's also some building cards down here in the lower right-hand corner. And we know what those do as well, and I'll talk about that in just a little bit. In terms of the miniatures on the board, there's definitely some things we see here. We know from StarCraft, they got some Terran Marines, Zerglings running around over here. Here's some Hydralisks down right here. This is a Queen, and that actually, you can tell that because there's a Queen card right down here. And these are Roaches, which honestly, I think they look a little small, but they say this game is pretty close to actual true scale. And I do feel we need to point out up in the top here, we have a Goliath. And I'm pretty sure, that's probably a Goliath. And I'm pretty sure these guys right here, they look kind of like fire bats, but I can't quite tell. The one miniature I'm not 100% sure of is down here. They do look like Terran Marines with combat shields, but I'm not sure if they got some sort of alternative weapon. That doesn't look like the normal Gauss rifle thing that the Terrans normally carry. Now across the middle here, we have 3 kind of shiny tokens. My guess is those are probably objective tokens you got to take to score points. And then especially around the Queen here, there are several other status tokens. Those may be for tracking energy and stuff like that, because she is a spellcaster, and they're going to try to emulate some of those spellcasting abilities, like with her transfuse ability is something they have talked about. bringing that to the tabletop games. I assume those tokens are used for tracking those kind of aspects. And one other thing I want to point out here is they describe this game as being very dynamic. And what you see on the board is not your entirety of your army. There's going to be some sort of reinforcement system. So this Goliath and Firebats back here, as well as these Zerglings, are not necessarily eliminated from the battle. They may have not entered the battle yet. Now, if I zoom in down on the corner here where we see some of the Zerg stat cards, you honestly can't tell a whole lot beyond the fact that the name is there. You can kind of read the names: Queen, Roach, Hydralisk, Zergling. You can also recognize them from their artwork. This is obviously a ruler right here, pretty run-of-the-mill thing. And unfortunately, all the symbols or stat numbers are kind of small, so it's hard to say exactly what's going on here with their abilities, but I'm sure we'll learn more about that as the game develops. Over here in terms of buildings, we have a Roach Warren as well as a spawning pool. So I'm going to zoom in on 3 Zerg tokens right here. See, one's back here behind this little spawning pool, or that's probably a Vespene Geyser, isn't it? It looks like a Vespene Geyser. I'm not sure what it would do for the tabletop game. It's kind of what it looks like, but there's one here, and they're purple, which probably indicates that they're Zerg because the other Zerg units that are already in production are purple. My guess is those are some sort of creep tokens that represent creep spread across the map. They haven't talked about that in the details of it, but given that it's Starcraft, that's an important aspect of Starcraft 2's combat strategy that'll probably come into this game. So here's another shot of what we just saw a moment ago, and I should point out that the terrain here is a prototype for Starcraft. And this is supposedly based on, or either the terrain or maybe the battle map is based on the Lost Temple map from Starcraft 2. And they plan to actually integrate some of the styles and artwork and themes of some of the more popular competitive maps of Starcraft 2 into the tabletop game. Now, the one thing I want to point out with this image, we do see some of the Terran stat cards down here. Once again, we can't read anything useful. But this picture right here is a drop ship. So I want to talk a bit more about what we know for sure about these building cards. The idea is you're trying to get some of the flavor that the base building aspect of StarCraft 2 would provide the game, and they're kind of bringing some of that in the tabletop miniatures game. So these various buildings will affect the gameplay in several ways. For example, they may unlock special abilities that certain units have. So I think they said the factory here can unlock a certain weapon upgrade for the Goliath. The dropship in particular has the ability to move units around the board. There were discussions of having proxy barracks, which is a very fast early game strategy from StarCraft 2, and that was going to allow you to bring in your reinforcements from multiple areas of the battlefield. So it gives it more flexibility in how you bring in more guys that help you out throughout the fight. And also the Protoss, they're talking a little bit about them. They would have some sort of gateway pylon combination card that allows you to throw a pylon down the battlefield and warp guys close into the fight, just like you can in the video game. Now, at the beginning of this video, I talked a little bit about how one of the things we know was there's going to be clear plastic pieces to these miniatures, and here's one such example. The Terran Marine, we've got a clear visor over the helmet because underneath that visor there's actually a sculpted miniature. So you can go ahead and paint that little miniature face up first, and then you can put the plastic visor over it to kind of let you see it through the plastic. Now, my one comment on this is not the first time a game company has done this, as much as they're kind of hyping up this translucent stuff. Games Workshop did it a long time ago for Warhammer 40,000, and even with some of the Necrons, they kind of got rid of those pieces because they're kind of annoying to work with. Because at least in this case, with this Terran Marine, they're telling us that you can snap that little piece in and out, which might be a little bit better. But the thing is, if you go ahead and want to paint up the miniature, you got to paint it up first before you put the clear plastic piece in, and then you can't use plastic glue to secure it in. But the problem is super glue tends to make the clear plastic things kind of foggy and ruins it up, so you got to use PVA glue. It's a whole thing to try to integrate colored plastic pieces into painted miniatures. You can do it, and it can look kind of cool, but it's a whole another step to the hobby process that frankly I tend to get annoyed with. So that's just my personal opinion on the aspect of it, but you know, it'll probably look pretty cool if you want to play around and actually try to work with it. And we have one rendering coming up here with the Protoss miniatures where it would look pretty darn cool if you pull it off correctly. Here's our first look at a Protoss Zealot miniature, and as the giant text down here suggests, this is a prototype pending licensor approval, because the plan here is to make the side blades as well as some other aspects of the Protoss miniatures in a clear plastic blue color. So one more Protoss preview unit right here for you. Of course, this guy right here would be the Sentry. It's a robotic support unit you can get fairly early on in the game. And with this particular guy, it's got a blue glowing energy ball in the back here. So the plan would be to make this back piece be translucent blue. Once again, they're hyping this whole translucent plastic thing up for their miniatures. So moving on to the Zerg here, we have a Hydralisk. Now it does continue to say prototype pending licensor approval down here, but I think this guy is moving pretty close to actual production miniature because they have purple sprues back here. So I don't know. This may still be 3D printed, but I think this one is actually a plastic molded injection piece. So down here, the miniature is modeled on top of a pile of skulls, which of course is a nice little callback to the Starcraft 1 like victory screen for the Zerg, where you had the Hydralisk in that kind of modeling position. It's just kind of a neat little touch and callback to some of the older Starcraft games. For the final picture, we have a computer rendering of a Zealot, and you see some of the clear plastic pieces in the form of the side blades, some little bubble energy thing here, and really cool effect is obviously the shield impact, where there's apparently this Zealot is being hit by something and the shield is taking the hit, and that is pretty darn cool looking. Hopefully it ends up looking just as awesome when it shows up on the tabletop. Well, that is about all I have for you guys today on the topic of the upcoming StarCraft miniatures game. And yes, I'm still putting together a video talking about the disaster the company had in regards to the Alien vs. Predator Kickstarter. I've got a bunch of those scripts I'm slowly doing research on, so expect to see those at some point in the not too distant future, i.e. maybe later this year or possibly early next year. We'll see how things go. But anyway, I'm Jason, the creator of the Tabletop Battlefield. Thank you guys all for watching. If you're into 3D printable gaming miniatures, you can check out the guys I got in front of me here from my Fractured Colony miniature line over at fracturedcolony.com. So with that, I'll see you guys all next time.